In this I.O., I will examine the impact of heteronormativity upon adolescent sexuality. Heteronormativity is the societal assumption that heterosexuality is the default sexuality. Consequently, from a young age, children all over the world are presented with just one possibility: to find a husband or a wife, get married and have children, thus living happily ever after. This global issue is critical to challenge, particularly within the media, as we see that in countries such as China, same-sex couples cannot be represented on the screen. In America, LGBT youth are twice as likely to be physically assaulted in schools, and still, in 2021, 70 countries criminalise same-sex relationships. Challenging societal expectations has never been so important, as we aim to create a more inclusive and accepting world. The texts I have chosen are The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter and Call Me By Your Name, directed by Luca Guadagnino. Ultimately, both texts offer a happy alternative ending outside of heteronormative restrictions for both their adolescent protagonists. Though both are fraught with some difficulty, the writers demonstrate to us as consumers that we must aim to be true to our individual desires in order to attain true happiness, regardless of the feelings of those around us. Both authors achieve this through the use of natural imagery to demonstrate the innate, unchangeable, and natural state of all so-called deviant sexualities. Guadagnino further cements this idea through the use of long takes, character positioning, and the unsaid, whilst Carter relies on subverting the reader's expectations of fairy tale conventions through visceral and animalistic imagery. The first text is The Bloody Chamber, written by renowned second-wave feminist Angela Carter in 1979, in which Carter rewrites prose classic fairy tales with a radical feminist twist, aiming to take old wine and put it into new wine bottles in order to make the bottle explode. In other words, to invite the reader to confront societal norms and truly consider how we are harming ourselves as individuals, our personal relationships, and society with outdated patriarchal and heteronormative values. The story, The Company of Wolves, demonstrates a happy alternative for heterosexual couples, where the dominant narrative perpetuated by heteronormativity of a nuclear family is deviated from in this rewriting of Little Red Riding Hood. In this extract taken from the ending of the story, Little Red is no longer a naive and subservient child, but a wise girl who knows she's nobody's meat, choosing to tame her wolf by bedding him and being as bestial as he is, picking lice from his fur and eating them before consummating their savage marriage ceremony in the bed of her murdered grandmother. In this narrative, Carter uses zoomorphism as she portrays the narrator's journey from the beginning of the story as an innocent child whose breasts are just beginning to swell, to a sexually mature and wise woman, in control of her own destiny and giving herself freely to the wolf lover. This journey is most prominent as we see the narrator eating lice from the wolf's fur, a shocking image that demonstrates the narrator existing outside of what society judges to be acceptable. However, by embracing her status as the other, living literally on the outskirts of society in a hidden cabin, the narrator is finally able to achieve her happy ending. This happy ending is not one born of traditional fairy tales, where a damsel in distress is rescued and hence married by a handsome prince, a tale of heteronormative banality, but instead Carter demonstrates the possibility of an alternative happy ending for her narrator, between the paws of her tender wolf. This subversion of fairy tale conventions can easily be noted throughout the whole body of work, as we see that in the title story of the collection, the narrator finds love with Jean-Yves, a blind lover who defies typical masculine traits as he is unable to sexualize the narrator through his loss of the male gaze, living with the narrator's mother and no children, thus disrupting the idea of a nuclear family. In The Courtship of Mr. Lyon, the narrator instead chooses to live alone with her dead husband's riches, casting aside the need for a partner entirely. And likewise, in The Earl King, the protagonist chooses to murder her husband before also living alone at the end of the story. It is interesting, though, that in all of Carter's stories, no character ever finds happiness in a same-sex relationship, perhaps demonstrating that Carter is still existing within a heteronormative world, where it is more plausible for a woman to find love in the arms of a wolf than with another woman. Alternatively, it could be argued that since Carter was aiming to shed light upon sexist and heteronormative tropes within fairy tales, challenging ideas of what heterosexual relationships could look like took precedence for her. My second text is Call Me By Your Name, directed by Luca Guadagnino and based on a novel by Andre Asselin. The last in his Desire trilogy of feature-length films, offering the trilogy's happy conclusion, Call Me By Your Name simultaneously demonstrates an alternative option from prescribed heterosexuality, whilst also drawing our attention to the difficulties faced by those who dare to deviate from the norm. Call Me By Your Name is a coming-of-age love story set somewhere in Italy in 1983, in which 17-year-old Elio falls in love with an older man, Oliver. The scene I have chosen comes as the men first begin to discuss their feelings for each other in coded terms, as they circle a monument in the centre of a quaint Italian village. Though temporally located in the height of the AIDS epidemic, the film's use of vague locations somewhere in Italy creates distance and freedom from the constraints of the outside world, as Elio and Oliver seem to exist in a never-ending summer where almost anything is possible. However, in the scene chosen we can see that the only limitations present are those which Oliver in particular puts on himself. This whole scene was filmed in a single shot on a single lens using a 35mm camera, which at times invites the viewer in, panning close into Elio's face as seen in the final image, and at times obscuring the viewer's sight of the characters entirely. In the first image, we see that Elio and Oliver are separated by a fence that encloses a war memorial, as the camera moves to show us the back of Elio's head, gazing at Oliver from a distance. This shot sutures the viewer's perspective to Elio's, denying us the opportunity to see Oliver's reaction to Elio's coded words, heightening our anxiety as we too feel the thrill of attempting the bravery to voice a love that dare not speak its name. As Elio cryptically says, "You know what things." This demonstrates how deviating from heteronormativity requires coded language and secrecy. Furthermore, in the background of this scene, we can see an old heterosexual couple gazing on, as though the director is offering the viewer the vision of what society deems acceptable in comparison to this illicit conversation. The distance offered by the single lens long shot, as well as the oppressive nature of a single shot, makes the viewer feel the pressure to get this one and only opportunity to speak out just right. Just as Elio only has one chance to break his silence, the director has only one take in which to successfully capture his art. In the second image, the camera is still situated behind Elio's head, but now pans up as the viewer follows his gaze up to the top of the war memorial, as he repeats 3 times, "Because I wanted you to know," and the dreamy soundtrack briefly plays until the camera returns to a neutral position once more. The use of non-diegetic sound and magical piano soundtrack, played briefly in this movement, is echoed along with the same use of the camera panning up later on to a church rooftop. Casting the viewer's gaze to the war memorial in the church reminds the viewer of the traditional ideal male and the societal expectations placed upon them. But the use of the soundtrack creates a space for an alternative, and this overlapped with Elio's words, his emphatic insistence that he wants Oliver to know about his feelings even in the face of such reminders of heteronormative boundaries and sexuality, perhaps suggests a transition away from this more traditional male archetype, towards a fluid and inclusive kind of masculinity, one that has a space for queer people. This scene proffers an answer to a previous scene, in which Elio and his mother read a story of a heartsick knight who wonders whether it is better to speak or die of his love. Elio relates to this story, believing that he will never be brave enough to speak. Yet, in this scene we are currently analysing, we see that he finds an answer to the knight's question. It is better for Elio to speak than to die. This symbolises a determination to be true to himself and the bravery that coming out takes in a heteronormative society, where one is faced with the possibility of alienation for being true to your sexuality, or the death of passion entirely if you choose to keep your sexuality hidden your whole life. This could even be represented by Elio and Oliver's clothing choices in these scenes, where the background of a muted pastel buildings, Elio wears a fluorescent backpack, standing out from the background scenery as he chooses to finally speak his truth, whilst Oliver is wearing pale green as he walks away from Elio's words and insists that they cannot talk about these things. Thus, Guadagnino emphasises to the viewer the binary choice that individuals have in a heteronormative society: to be brave, stand out and speak, or to blend in, remain silent and let love die. The greatest lesson that both texts teach us is the importance of family and individual bravery when defying societal expectations and moving beyond heteronormative molds of what happiness looks like. For Elio, his father's speech at the end of the film, in which he affirms the relationship he had with Oliver and says to Elio, "How you live your life is your business. Just remember that our hearts and our bodies are given to us only once," provides Elio the safe space and opportunity to be brave and reach beyond heteronormative boundaries, so that by the end of the film, Elio's tears are a sign of strength and of the love that he had, the pain that he felt, and the lessons learned of his first romance. Similarly, Little Red is supported by her family, with the story beginning with the lines, "She has been much too loved to ever feel scared." For both the protagonists in these texts, the support offered by their families is the most crucial aspect to their ability to reach a conclusion that is true to their own hearts. Furthermore, they are both shown to require the agency to choose their own paths, with Little Red giving herself freely to the wolf, and Elio deciding to actively speak and pursue Oliver. This shows that with a combination of individual bravery and support from loved ones, it is possible to defy society's standards, even if the wider world isn't yet ready to accept us for who we are. Finally, both texts use natural imagery to affirm to the consumer the innate and unchangeable nature of our sexualities. Call Me By Your Name uses the symbol of the peach, used during family scenes and sex scenes, and The Company of Wolves terminates with snowlight and moonlight in a pine forest. This helps the consumer to understand that it is only society's own construction that degrades alternative sexualities, and not that heterosexuality is inherently better or the default in any way. These coming-of-age narratives portray heteronormativity as a stark reality, something that can be overcome, an important message for all youth today, whether on the LGBT spectrum or not, whether pursuing a monogamous nuclear family or not, representing hope for something beyond the rigid standards of the past, where there is room for everyone to find their own version of happily ever after.